Hello and welcome to GraphQL Radio, the GraphQL podcast. So today we have a very special episode. My name is Nicholas Berg and here is my co-host, Abi. Hey, Abi.
Hey, how's it going? I'm Abi Iyer.
Hey. And we also have a very special guest today, and that is Michael from GraphCMS.
How's it going? I'm Michael.
Welcome, Michael.
Excited to be here.
Hey, Michael. All right, so before we dive in and we talk to Michael about what he's up to, we are currently looking for companies and people who want to support the show. So if you're interested in supporting the show, then reach out to us via email. You can email us at hello@graph.cool, and we'll also put the email into the show notes. All right, so let's dive right into the conversation. So I think what would be nice in the beginning to give the listeners a little bit of background about who our guest is that is speaking to them today is if you could talk a little bit, Michael, about your background in programming, how you got into programming in the first place, and where you got to where you are today.
Oh, well, that is a good question, though, and there's no short answer to it. I think it started back in the 90s when I was, I think 11 years old. Wow. I was always fascinated by the interwebs, so I started just with web design. I think I just tried to set up some websites still in the 90s. So it was mostly about getting some dancing Jesuses on a website, and a very quirky one, and colorful stuff. And I always wanted to create things. I wasn't just consuming like content on the internet. I always was fascinated by, how are things done. So I decided to go dig deeper into computer science. And so I studied computer science, and just was in love with programming and doing stuff.
All right. So what were the kind of technologies that you were actually focused on while you were studying? Like, did you do some web development before, or like what were your favorite technologies to work with before you started your company?
Definitely, I was very focused on front end development. So this is what I still do today over at GraphCMS. I'm more of a front end guy. I like to do user interfaces, user experience stuff. I know there's still always room for improvement, but this was my sweet spot. So basically, over at GraphCMS, we have two co-founders. I'm one of the co-founders, and then we have Dania. He's our, I would say, CTO, because he has a much stronger programming background than I, at least in the whole JavaScript programming world. So he ended up being the CTO actually, and I would say, I guess I'm the CEO, because what I do is all and nothing. So.
Cool. All right. So you already have mentioned your co-founder there who can join us tonight, but still, like, what is the story behind GraphCMS? Like, how did you two meet, and how did you come up with the idea to found this company?
Right. So after my master's studies in computer science, I was joining a company here in Gießen, where we are located. And this was where I met Daniel. So I was working there, and we met, and it was a company in digital asset management. What this is basically Dropbox for enterprises, like centralized file repositories with metadata enhancements, stuff like it. And it was Java enterprise development, and we noticed that there was something going on. We noticed that there was like a huge explosion in the JavaScript universe. Meteor was coming up, React was coming up. GraphQL wasn't really open sourced by then. It was early 2015. And we thought we just didn't want to stay in the Java enterprise space. We wanted to do something on our own. So we decided to leave the company and to actually do our own like small agency and later on product development. At first, we wanted to do a digital asset management system as well. Like we thought, oh, we can do this better with JavaScript technologies. And but then one day in early March, a blog post by Chris Collier popped up in my Twitter feed. It was the name of the blog. Chris Collier is the guy that's doing CSS tricks, a very popular front-end blog. And the name of the blog post actually was, "What is headless? What does headless content management mean? What is this new thing about?" And at this point, to this point, I didn't really know the concept of headless content management system, but it was just so natural. It just made sense. So like, I think we will talk about the headless concept a little later. And so I immediately texted Daniel. I registered. Well, I first read the blog post, and then I was asking myself, wait, isn't anybody doing this with GraphQL already? And no, nobody was doing this at that time. So I opened my Telegram. I was texting to Daniel, dude, I have some idea. We need to do this. And he was like, all right, let's do this. And GraphCMS, the idea at least was born.
Nice. When was that roughly?
It was in March 2016. So
okay,
wow,
1.5 years ago.
Pretty fresh, right? So before we get into like what GraphCMS is at the core, you know, I come from an agency background as well, where CMSs are things that power people who are not really developers, or even developers too.
Right.
Depends on, you know, what the product is and the structure. For the listeners who maybe are new to web development, or maybe are only like application level programmers, what is a CMS?
So a CMS, a content management system, is a system that empowers people with a non-technological background to contribute to applications and websites as well, by having an easy user interface to add content to the database of like the website or application. So
yeah, and so today in the market, there are several CMS type systems for maybe static websites like Squarespace or WordPress. But what's so special about having a headless CMS?
So headless CMSs are around for a couple of years now. Also, the concept of content management is pretty old. I think the first content management systems popped up in the early 90s. And for about, I don't know, 20 years, it was working with the CMS was always coupled with the presentation of what came out of the CMS, like the website. So WordPress would give you the tool for managing the content, but it would also be responsible for generating the template, like the view.
The theme, right?
Yeah, the theme.
Yeah.
So what a headless content management system does is it will give you, at the end, it will give you the API, the interface to your content. And the advantage, the benefits of this is actually that you're in full charge of the front end. So you can connect a website to your headless content management system. It could be an app. It could be, I don't know, some smart TV app. It doesn't matter. It could be even something totally unrelated to internet. It could be like, it can be seen like a content microservice. It fits in any tool chain that needs content.
So my experience, my rudimentary experience of building these type of CMS platforms is essentially an engineer builds a feature that maybe a sales or success agent needs to be mutating the database somehow. And you know, for the longest time, they'll be giving you support tickets like, could you please add this? Could you update this? Can you do this? And then out of necessity of just being an engineer and solving problems, you put some UI on it and you write an API and you say, hey, go to this moderation tool, and then you can just do it yourself.
Right.
But the problem with that is, at least in my experience, is you're kind of building these not in cohesive ways, right? There's no cohesion with that. Like this tool for this one person needs one interface, and maybe it's some API, and then you have another one with another API, and you want to front all your different, Zendesk or whatever, and all these tools. I feel like a lot of people are reinventing the wheel today,
right.
at least at their own companies and stuff like that. So obviously the word graph is in the CMS here, and as listeners of the show know that GraphQL makes building front ends or products very flexible. How does GraphQL fit into the GraphCMS concept?
So well, what you get at the end is a GraphQL API, of course. So in the last years, well, all of the headless content management systems were providing REST API, and we thought that bringing GraphQL to the headless concept would be just a natural evolution, because what we see is, I still don't know if we live in a GraphQL bubble, but I think GraphQL is a really huge thing, and
Sure.
Everyone sees this huge adoption of GraphQL, and I've never met a developer that said to me, after using GraphQL, I still feel comfortable with REST APIs. That is not the case. So the basic idea behind GraphCMS was just to bring this whole new level of developer convenience to the headless.
So would it be possible, I know this is kind of like a fast one on you, would it be possible for you to give us a demo of GraphCMS over the video here?
I could try. I didn't prepare one actually, but it shouldn't be that hard. So let's maybe just jump in and create like a new project that would represent just a blog. I'll just name it like blog. This is the user interface.
Wow.
We will start a trial here. Project creation takes a few seconds. Now let me hide the dock, or maybe I can go even full screen.
Nice.
Does that work?
Looks great. Material UI, I see, or am I wrong?
Yeah, I love it.
Yes, it's a mix of like homebrew, Material UI. So 5 minutes,
nice.
5 minutes before the show, we released a new version of the web app. So I hope everything performs nice.
This is a field test, man.
Yeah.
Right. So everything should be even better.
Yes. So basically, what you do in headless content management, or in the general workflow, is that you define the structure of your content, and then the content management system will give you the user interface to onboard the content related to your structure, right? And after that, you're all set to just connect some front end. So let's see. So a blog would have something like a post, I guess.
For those listening on their commute and stuff, we're just going through the GraphCMS UI and building out a blog. So please check the video recording if you want to catch up on the details.
So let's see. So post will most likely have a title. What fields do we else have? Like a post body where you could maybe like write your blog post. You can decide between different widgets that the CMS will generate. You could do.
Oh, nice! You even got the markdown there. So
yeah.
I would totally prefer that one to go and write my blog posts.
So let's take Markdown. You usually have to input like a display name. Display name of the field is always what is displayed in the user interface, and the API ID. The API ID is for it's the identifier in your generated GraphQL API. So let's call this Markdown text, and this one MD text. So, and we got all like fancy stuff, or like let's say basic stuff.
Colors, dates.
You can have
pretty extensive here.
You can have even, I don't know, location. Let's add like a location field to this just to show it off.
Nice.
Yeah,
this is awesome.
that will do the trick. So after creating the post model, you're good to go. You can create a new blog post. Then some, I think this is, I have to switch it over here. Some markdown. And for the location, we pick Gießen. Click Save and Publish.
I'm like blown away right now. This is so cool. This is really cool.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, it's a really nice UI as well.
Thanks. So after this, you can go to the API Explorer, which is just the graphical, and you can try how your GraphQL will look like.
Nice.
And you can start fetching your data. You have the markdown text, you have the location, and yeah, that's pretty much it actually. So that would be like a short.
The API ID which you had to specify on the field is now essentially like the field name of the type that was generated in the GraphQL schema, right?
Exactly.
Okay, very interesting. Cool.
This is an awesome take.
Yeah, that's a really simple example. I mean, you can build huge models on that, and yeah, you get a really nice content management workflow. So you could just now invite other people as well to join and add some content, and now you're good to go to build any front end you like. You can build a website, app. It doesn't matter.
Wow.
Doesn't matter.
So to me, this empowers developers to focus on the craft of developing the site, and the content is kind of like, who cares where it comes from? I'm focused on building a great experience. That's awesome. Cool.
It gives you true front-end freedom.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And also staff flexibility. So what's important is, one thing to add is if you work like with older or traditional content management systems, you're always tied to a templating language that works with a CMS altogether.
Yeah.
And some developers consider this as maybe prehistoric templating languages, or they don't want to actually work with this if they know React or something. So, and it doesn't even matter what the next big front-end technology is. Your content and API stays the same. You could just go from React to Vue, I don't know, or the next big thing. You don't have to, the CMS won't stop you.
Cool. Were there like more features that you can mention which you have built in except for the GraphQL API?
Well, for example, you can run custom code. You can register like webhooks. So the GraphQL API works in both ways. It's not read only like a lot of headless CMS APIs. They offer just the read-only part because they're designed to just display content. GraphCMS is more of like those more back-end as a service features, as it offers also a write API, and depending on your writes and mutations you send to the server, you can run custom codes via webhooks.
Cool.
Yeah, something like this. Right. And the next release, a major release, will bring content localization. This is still missing. Currently we're working on something that's called project templates. So people can export their content model and do some sort of marketplace and expose like an, I don't know, e-commerce content model. And they could just provide maybe a GitHub repository for front-end code to this e-commerce template as well. So we want to try. We were trying to build some sort of community around like content models and.
Very cool. All right. Should we talk a little bit about the technology choices that you made for the product and how you built it and like what the decision process was? So what does your stack look like? What kind of languages do you use? So how's everything built?
So it's full JavaScript, the whole stack. And I think we had 4 major iterations on this. So the first prototype was actually built on PostgreSQL. I don't know if you know this project.
Yeah.
It's from an Apollo guy. What you did with PostgreSQL was you would specify a schema of a Postgres database, and based on the schema of the database, it would generate the GraphQL schema as well. That was the first iteration actually, but at some point we realized that it's not really flexible enough for our needs. So we spent, I think we spent 2 or 3 months with the PostgreSQL solution, and then we decided to do the schema generation part on ourselves. So we would write a custom service that would create, that would just generate a schema and all the resolvers. But it was very hard. We were a team of 2, and it wasn't part-time, so we couldn't do GraphCMS in full-time back then. We were doing like 50% of our time. We had to do like agency work to get some cash in, and 50% was developing the project, the GraphCMS, and it was just too hard. We had a prototype running, but back then, at that time, Johannes from GraphQL approached us, and he saw our project, and he asked us, listen guys, you want to build a CMS? If you want to build a CMS, you need the backend layer. If you want to build headless CMS, you will need the API layer, and this is something that we could provide. Shouldn't we build this thing together? And Daniel and I were thinking, not thinking all too long, actually, because we thought it was pretty much a good idea to build GraphCMS around GraphQL, and it performs. It still is. It was the 3rd iteration then, and it still performs really well. So we decided to go with GraphQL.
Solid.
It's solid. It's like state-of-the-art
Good choice.
GraphQL backend. And at first we were doing all the stuff on GraphQL. So there's you can imagine there's one master project, one like main database where all of the meta information of all the projects is stored. And this was also a GraphQL project because we thought, okay, if you go with GraphQL, we do it all on GraphQL. But this turned out not too well. So we decided for the GraphCMS projects, for the instance APIs, it was really great. But after some months, we decided to do our own systems API, like to break the main project out of GraphQL, to do it ourselves, because we wanted to have full control on the schema, because our plan was to release our system API that is responsible for creating projects, creating models, creating fields and stuff to our developers as well. And we wanted to have this API closer to the domain, closer to the CMS, and this wasn't quite possible, or isn't quite possible with GraphQL yet, despite it was a really cool experience. But we wanted to have full control on the schema that we will give out to our developers. So we now run on a hybrid solution. So our system API is custom written. We did the migration, I think, 1 or 2 months ago. It took us some time, but now we're there. But all other projects are powered by GraphQL, which runs really well. So that's it.
That's awesome. So when we talk about the different GraphQL technologies that are coming out, I think the way that you guys structured GraphCMS is on the front end, you can use any type of GraphQL client. Is that correct?
Yeah, sure.
Which is awesome.
You could just do HTTP requests, like the raw form. You can use Apollo. You can use, I think GraphQL has provided like a very thin GraphQL client as well. What's the name, Nicholas?
It's called GraphQL request.
I haven't tried that one, but I think it's pretty cool. You can use Locker. Of course, Relay, because GraphQL also provides us the Relay API. This was also one of the reasons we decided to go for GraphQL, because it was a quick win.
Awesome. So what about, so a big trend on our show recently is pretty much talking about real-time data and subscriptions. It's a hot topic. How does GraphCMS fit into the subscription ecosystem that is, blooming right now or trying to grow?
Right. So again, since we run on GraphQL and GraphQL provides a great subscription management, we get that for free, even though we haven't bring this into GraphCMS yet. So basically, all the features that GraphQL provides will land eventually in the CMS if they make sense for us. So this will be, for example, the user management. So user auth, because GraphQL provides like this really powerful permission system as well. And this will be subscription management, but not so many people in the content management space actually ask for subscription management, because usually you would go like for a pure backend as a service solution if you're looking for subscriptions. It's just not that important for a content management space.
Yeah. So I mean, let's say you were to build some or provide some real-time features to GraphCMS. Are there any plans for what those might be, or just not yet?
Just not yet. I mean, it's up to the user that will use the subscriptions, right? So it could be anything like a news feed or something, but
build it when they need it, for sure. Oh man, so this is a very powerful product. What I'd like to understand is how it differs from this project called CF-GraphQL from Contentful. Are you aware of that project?
Yes, I'm actually aware, and I think that at some point, well, that's a GraphQL library or a GraphQL project from Contentful, which is also a headless content management vendor. I think they're the most popular in the whole space. I think they started in 2011 or 12, and they're based on REST. And they came up with a lab project a couple of months ago that would take a REST API from Contentful and wrap GraphQL API around it, which isn't super convenient if you ask me, because the GraphQL server you could spin up with the CF Contentful project, it will resolve against the REST API and not against the database. So there's this step in between. So I don't think it's very flexible. If you want to build a solid GraphQL backend, your resolvers have to resolve against the database.
All right, that makes sense.
And I think one more thing. I think I can see this with a couple of different headless CMS vendors as well, that they just put like a GraphQL wrapper in front of their REST APIs, which isn't the right way, if you ask me. But we're pretty sure at some point that maybe all of the headless CMS vendors will jump on the GraphQL train, because it's too important.
Right. So one of the problems I saw with the CF GraphQL project is that, I mean, as you said, it's just a wrapper on top of a REST API. So they don't really solve the problem of having actually solving the n+1 request problem, for example, because what they do when you send a query where you need all that data, behind the scenes, they still have to access the REST APIs with the corresponding number of calls. So it's not going to save you the performance. It's just going to provide you with the convenience on the client side, which is nice, but it doesn't really solve the problem fundamentally. So I can see where you're coming from there.
Yeah, exactly. This can be nice if you do, for example, static site generation workflows where performance just doesn't matter, because you perform like an update on your static site generations. But one other thing is I think the APIs that you can generate with these tools are also just read-only, so there's no mutations to the backend, because they have, I think Contentful, they have two distinct APIs. They have one for, they have this one read-only API that would just that you use for reading all the content, and they have one like content onboarding API that you would use for I don't know, sending GraphQL mutations to it. But this project just resolves against this read-only APIs.
Cool. All right, so before we jump into the picks, I've got one last question, and that is, you just launched with GraphCMS, I think last week on Product Hunt. So how did the launch go, and were you happy about how everything went?
That was awesome. So we were pretty much the whole day above the fold on Product Hunt, which is like a huge traffic boost. The spike on the analytics chart, it just went like it was the hockey stick, right?
That's awesome.
We had a total user growth of, I think, 50% in just 1 week.
Wow, that's really cool. Awesome.
So it went really nice. We were still pretty busy with the after launch things to do, like yeah, you know the game.
Yeah, sure.
Just thousands of feature requests, and yeah, we're pretty happy we finally launched.
Right, the work won't get less after you launch, that's for sure.
And nobody told me this, actually, that launching the product is not the hard part.
Well, we're done here.
Yeah, like, top of the fold on Product Hunt, I guess, I'm done here. No, it only gets harder from there.
Yeah, nobody told me this.
Awesome. So I just want to thank Michael so much for being on the show today. This is one of the most interesting guests and products we've had, especially the walkthrough was amazing. So for the people who are listening just with the audio, please check out the video, and please, like, it is such a beautiful product and so powerful that I was blown away personally. And so we like to do these things to wrap the show up called picks. Other shows do picks as well, like JavaScript Jabber and stuff. And so I'll start off with pick. So my pick is not really programming related, but my.
Can you please explain me the pick concept again?
Sure. Here's the pick concept. The pick is something that you want the listeners to go maybe read about or research or experience that maybe is part of your work or something you're interested in. I'll go.
It can be programming related, it can be a book, can be an ebook, can be a backpack that you find cool, can be really anything you find.
So I think, for example, Lee Byron, his pick was the store that he gets all his bow ties from. So that's a pick, and people can go look at that. So my pick is, I've been getting into cooking a lot lately, and there's a service here called Blue Apron. I'm not sure if you guys know about it, but it pretty much gives you all these ingredients and in a recipe, and they send it to you. So my girlfriend and I have been just learning how to cook essentially by using these Blue Apron ingredients and recipes. So check it out. Blue Apron's great if you're in the US and don't really know what to cook or don't know how to get ingredients and all that stuff. It's quite a good experience.
I don't know how to cook at all.
Well, you know how to cook APIs at least.
That's for sure.
All right, so I'm going to go next. So my pick this week is the Learn GraphQL with GitHub course. So GitHub just launched like a web-based course with webcasts and an online training course where they're teaching GraphQL essentially from the beginning for complete beginners. And they also explain like how the GitHub API works and how you can migrate from REST to GraphQL. So I think that's really interesting, and I also think that the kind of format that they chose for this with these kind of webinars that you can subscribe to is really interesting, so I definitely recommend people to check that out.
I'm sorry, guys. I actually suck at the pig part. I wasn't prepared for this, and phew.
Okay, shouldn't be a problem.
I will hand some pig in later.
Okay,
that's totally fine. Sweet. So that wraps our show up today. If you guys and girls haven't checked out GRAPHCMS, please do. Also want to give a big shout out to Nick Burke, our new co-host. Johannes will be back eventually. He's out CEOing. And I know Michael knows what that means.
Right.
He's taking hors d'oeuvres and kissing babies. That's what we like to call it here. So he'll be back soon. And Nick obviously is doing a great job. So just want to give some props there. Again, if you want to support the show, please email hello@graph.cool. And we can take it from there.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me again, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.